Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. Your calls are welcome on a First Amendment Friday night at 866-439-5277. Emails go to talk@larslarson.com. And it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Byron Henry, who is a Dallas-Fort Worth attorney and a constitutional scholar. Mr. Henry, thanks for taking the time on a Friday night.
My pleasure.
So where is this argument coming from that the government should declare pornography a health hazard and make it even easier to sue pornography websites?
Well, Lars, I think where it's coming from is just a general overall feeling that the government has always had the ability, as you know, to regulate what we call vices, whether or not we could make a case that they harmed others or just ourselves. Gambling, drinking, though, of course, that has effects in society and a lot of other areas. And this legislator is just thinking to himself, I think, based on what I've read, is why isn't something that's detrimental to society, to families, time with respect to production in the workforce and whatnot, why isn't that similar to other things that we either regulate, prohibit, or allow people to sue for as public health hazards? And despite the First Amendment implications of being able to produce and view explicit information in your own home or at theaters or whatnot, the Supreme Court has said that obscenity and this kind of hardcore pornography has secondary effects, which lessens its First Amendment protection. So the real key, I think, is studies or proof that this is not only addicted, let's say, assume it is psychologically or emotionally addictive, such as tobacco or gambling or other things. Then the question becomes, what proof do we have that it's somehow harming society generally or has harmful secondary effects, as the Supreme Court has said? And once you take that step, you're not very far off from full regulation based on other Supreme Court precedent and other vices that we've regulated.
We're talking about Senator Todd Weiler's idea, who's from Utah. He says it's not the government coming in and saying what you can and can't watch. It's just basically a message to the industry that if somebody in Utah can prove damages from your product, that they may be held liable financially. I want to tell you something, Mr. Henry. I don't smoke cigarettes. I occasionally smoke a cigar, but I understand that cigarettes are they are something that is damaging to the individual who chooses to smoke them, and tobacco is addictive. But opening the door up that way seems to me to be a terrible idea, because in the case of cigarettes, I saw companies sued. There was one judgment in my neck of the woods in favor of the estate of a man who died from cancer, who had smoked cigarettes for 40 years, all of it during a time when the Surgeon General had warned that the stuff was dangerous. If he makes that personal choice and it has a deleterious effect to him or his family or whatever, I still, I have a tough time opening up that door so that lawyers can go out and make, or municipalities and governments can make tens or hundreds of millions of dollars.
The libertarian streak in me, I'm conservative, but the libertarian streak in me says the same thing. I'm usually not for allowing lawyers and or parties to sue industries when they're perfectly aware of what that industry does. We've got that issue with firearms, where somehow it now becomes the firearm manufacturer's fault when criminals get guns against the law and then use them against the law to harm others. But I think the issue is that we already do it in so many areas. That why is the pornography or that industry immune? It's not in the door. That we're already in the door on those things. The question is there a reason why this industry should be immune from the typical addictive properties versus the causation of whether or not it caused someone to, or should they just be open to the same type of lawsuits and whatnot that other industries have already been opened up to? I'm a little nervous about it, because I'm generally for you make your own decisions, and as long as you're not harming someone else directly, then we should probably keep the government out of it. And I sympathize with that, with your view on that. But the issue I think this senator, these legislators have is just basically skating with a lot of the stuff they're putting out there, how they're getting people addicted, and how it's harming families and society, having effects on society in general. But somehow they're skating on the issue by hiding behind the First Amendment. And I think that's the target.
And that's the thing. I mean, I look at even the argument that is deleterious to the workplace because, because bosses find that they catch employees who are wasting a lot of time. In fact, we've heard some great stories about federal employees who've been caught, sitting watching pornography for hours. To me, that's just bad management by the employer, whether the employer is a government or a private industry, and that there are ways for employers to control it, and there are consequences employers can lay down, whether it's government or private sector, to say, if we catch catch you doing this and wasting the company's time, we'll give you a pink slip and send you out the door. So I think you can address that. As far as what it does to families, shoot, I could argue that the internet is a gigantic time waster, and it is. And I could argue that the internet can have deleterious effects on families if families choose not to control either the use of adults or the use of children. But I really don't want the government involved in that if I can avoid it.
I think you're probably right, and as I said, at least from a conservative perspective, we need to stick with our initial principles: is personal responsibility and less government regulation and intrusion. Because it might sound like a good idea, a good conservative plan to crack down on pornographers and the purveyors of this material, but you have to look at it. It's the same theory that liberals use in other states to basically allow makers of sugary drinks to be sued for getting you addicted and making your own choice to drink too much Coke, or fatty foods. So when conservatives lined up against, regulating fast food and other foods as addictive and allowing lawsuits because people are obese, conservatives said, wait a minute, that's a personal choice.
Yep.
We don't want the government in what we eat. So we just need to be careful and think it through and be consistent on these things before we just jump on the bandwagon, because it is a seedy industry and it's not very favorable, especially to a lot of conservatives and a lot of people of faith. But the issue is that you need to be consistent on principle, and I think you've stated it well, that it's a personal responsibility issue and a management issue, and there's other ways to do it than regulation indirectly through lawsuits.
Well, as an attorney, I want you to comment on this, too, because the big fear ought to be that the government will see a pile of cash in this. And here's how I'd see it. I mean, I guess if a family were to say, our son became addicted to watching pornography, so therefore we're going to sue, and we want individual damages for the rehab he had to go through or for his lost years or lost youth. But when the government see it, and here's where I would see the government going after it, I could see some people, especially on the left, saying this stuff is deleterious to society, that it paints women in a really ugly way, and I think a lot of pornography does, that it sends really bad messages about the way that people should treat each other. I mean, some pornography is particularly, execrable, but as soon as you open that door, I can see every city, county, and state doing the same thing they did with the master settlement with the tobacco company, saying, hey, there's a pile of money. And you never want to get between a politician and a pile of money, because they'll run you over. And I could see those folks saying, well, the state of Utah says that this stuff has had a deleterious effect on male-female relationships, on relationship within families. So we'd like you to pay us $100 billion because the politicians, and I don't think Utah would probably do it, but California might. They'd say, we could use $100 billion. Let's go after it and make this industry pay for what they've done.
Certainly. It usually starts with runaway government as a power grab, and it almost always ends, as you just described, in a money grab. And the money grab would start something like, well, you can't fire that employee because he's addicted, and so you get a runaway labor department, which hopefully we wouldn't have under a president-elect, then-President Trump, but let's just say you have a runaway labor department that's basically making social policy up as they go along. I don't know if you've ever heard of that happening before.
Oh, yeah.
It does.
Yeah, it does.
And so that happens, and next thing you know, employers can't manage it or police it. Like, saying that employers can't run background checks on people. Employers can't they can't fire people for that. That's a disability. So what it starts at is a regulatory power grab, and it ends exactly where you are, with settlements and consent decrees and completely reshaping the employment industry or whatever industry they decide to stick their nose into, and they end up making money off of it, as they did with tobacco. And I'm not saying that it is a bad idea to regulate hardcore pornography in some form or fashion. I just need to be convinced as a conservative that before we do that, there needs to be a lot of studies and a lot of care taken before we just jump right into that with both feet, because it is exactly what you said. It is a slippery slope, and consistency on principles. If you tell me, I'm going to say keep the government out of it 9 times out of 10.
And I'm up against the clock. Byron Henry, thank you very much.
The Lars Larson Show.